안녕하세요. 유학교육전문기관 아이비프렙입니다. 오늘은 2017년에 아이비 시험을 치고 같은 해 옥스포드 엔지니어에서 공부를 하신 선배님을 모시고 입학 준비 과정과 대학 과정에 대해서 들어보는 시간을 가지도록 하겠습니다. Hello Ben, thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Could you please introduce yourself for us?
Yes, so my name is Benjamin. I graduated from Oxford in 2022 from engineering. I did an integrated master's, so that's a 3-year bachelor's and then directly into a 1-year master's. I went to international schools in Moscow and in Prague, and then I graduated from IB and then went to Oxford, and I'm currently doing a PhD at UCL.
Okay, thank you. So, which year did you take IB exam, and do you remember which subjects you took?
Yes, so I took my IB exam in 2018, and my higher levels were math, chemistry, and physics. My standard level subjects were economics, Russian, and English Lit.
Okay, so do you remember your final score?
Yes, overall my score was a 42. I had a 7 in all my HLs and then a 667 for SL.
I see. Nice. Well done.
Thank you.
And what else did you have to prepare for Oxford entrance?
So the Oxford, to get admitted to Oxford, there was the interview as well as the PAT exam, which I had to pass. And then obviously the standard, there was the submission of predicted grades as well as the personal statement.
I see. So PAT exam, that's for engineer is specifically, right? It's not for every majors.
No, so the PAT exam, if I remember correctly, is for engineers in physics. It stands for the Physics Aptitude Test, and it majorly focuses really on topics covered in the A-level physics course.
I see. So if some student is doing IB physics, do they have to prepare extra, you think? How hard was it? Do you remember?
It was a very tough exam. I walked out of that exam thinking that I was not going to get a spot in Oxford. I thought that was it. I was finished. And I was very surprised when I got asked for an interview. The exam, the material in A-level physics and in IB physics is largely the same, but there are some things which are different and some minor details. And that also overlaps with the math subjects, because sometimes they ask you to do some mathematical operations which we haven't covered in IB, but they had covered in A-level. And so that did lead to some difficulties, but the exam was quite tough. And I think what's important to remember is that everyone comes out of that exam thinking that was a very complicated exam.
Okay, I see. Do you remember how long did you have to study for the exam?
I started studying for that exam, I think specifically for that exam, around September, October time.
Okay, and when is the exam?
I don't remember exactly when it is.
But
it's in the first half of the year.
December.
Yes.
So it must be.
I think it's a little bit before that.
Okay. So maybe 2-3 months you studied for
the
exam.
I studied 2-3 months for the exam, but again, largely the topics are the same. Most of my revision consisted of doing past paper questions.
Okay. And interview. Let's move on to interview.
Yes.
Do you remember the format? How many days did you do?
Yes. So, funny story. I actually almost missed my interview because my email was sent to my junk email box, and I didn't see it until about 24 hours before we had to confirm that we were going to go there. So it was a lot of stress, but I got to Oxford on time. I did my interview. There are 2 interviews. So when you apply to Oxford, you have to select a college to which you want to attend. And normally your first interview will be with that college, and then you will get another interview with a different college. Interviews tend to be relatively standard, so you have you as the student, and then you'll have two professors. They will both be from that college and professors of the subject that you are studying. So if you're doing engineering, you'll have two engineering professors. If you're doing physics, two physics, etc. It was very scary as an 18-year-old to have that experience. In my first interview, I was very, very stressed and I didn't perform particularly well. My second interview, I was a lot more relaxed, which really allowed me to do much better for the exam, for the interview, and respond to the questions much more honestly than I would have otherwise.
Does it happen on the same day or different days?
It was the same day. So I arrived one evening, and then I had a first interview in the morning, and then a second interview in the afternoon.
Okay, so every student who got invited for interview, they do two interviews.
Two interviews, yes.
I see. The first interview, was it about your subject or is it about your attitude or?
So both exams, realistically, they compose of two parts. You'll have a math question. Well, you have two math questions, and then you will have a question about your personal statement. The most important part are the questions about the math. And what they want you to see here is not, are you getting it right, are you getting it wrong? What they want you to see is, how are you able to deal with that information, the question, because the format of the interview is, they ask you a question, and then you need to not just solve the question, the math question, but you need to walk them through. You need to verbally explain your process of thinking, how you're responding to the question, and if you make a mistake, that's okay. I made a mistake in both of my interviews. When you realize you make a mistake, you have to say, oh, I made a mistake. This is what I did wrong. And then you'll keep going. Or maybe if you're stuck, don't be afraid to say, I'm stuck. The interviewer will then give you maybe a little bit of a hint. And then you have to take that idea on board, that information on board, and they want to see how you're able to adapt to maybe a question one you don't know, or to how you will react when you're given more information. What they really are assessing is how you think.
I see.
It's not necessarily your aptitude. Because normally, if you've done well enough on the PAT, your aptitude is good enough. What they're trying to see here is, how are you dealing with that extra information, your thinking process, and can they teach you? Because you have to remember that these tutors are going to be teaching you for the next 4 years. So they want people that they can teach.
I see.
And that's a very big part.
It's a while ago, but I just want to understand that, and I want to let students know the difficulty level of questions. Do you remember any question you got during interview?
I do. So one of the questions was, if you had a cone, a three-dimensional cone, and then you have a cylinder underneath. And the way they pose the question is, you have a birthday hat and you have a birthday cake underneath. And they want to maximize the volume of the cylinder given a certain height h of the cone.
Okay.
And so it's an optimization problem where you have to obviously differentiate to find the best possible solution. So you have a cone like this, you have a cake underneath, and how high should the cake be to maximize the volume of the cake? So that was one of the questions. Another question was, there was a string, and there were two weights of different, two hanging masses, and you had to find the tension along with the string.
Wow, this is difficult.
It's a difficult question. This was a difficult question.
Okay.
And then the last question I remember was, I like this question. This was a very intuitive and interesting question for me. So they make you look through a piece of copper tube, and you have to look at a white wall. And when you do, you'll notice that you get 3 concentric circles that get darker and darker. And they ask you why. And the answer is that because of the wave light of the light waves bouncing through the tube, you'll see that actually on the ones that obviously are the most bright, they don't bounce at all onto the tube, and so they lose no energy, so you get full brightness. The next concentric circles are the ones that have bounced once on the tube, and then is bounced twice on the tube, and then 3 times, etc., etc., etc. And so you get these concentric circles which get darker and darker because the light has bounced more and more in the tube, and so lost energy. So it's a question where rather than it being about your knowledge, it's about your ability to intuitively understand a problem and then see how you go from there.
Yeah, it sounds like the question itself is simple but difficult to answer.
Exactly.
I see, interesting. Okay. And what else will be helpful for students for Oxford entrance?
So, by far the most important part are your grades, your predicted grades, and your PAT exam. Now, your
interview.
The interview is later.
Okay.
So you will get invited to an interview if you have succeeded well enough in the PAT and your grades are good enough, and they will invite you for an interview. Oxford has about, I think, it's like 20% of students getting invited to an interview. And then from then on, you have a roughly 50% chance of getting it.
Okay.
I know that Cambridge does it differently. So Cambridge will offer interviews to a lot more people, but then if you get an interview, there's a lower percentage of those people who will get an offer.
I see.
So the other part that is very important if you're trying to reach an interview is your personal statement. Your personal statement, the most important thing to remember is you're trying to sell yourself. And you're not only trying to say why you are good for them, but also why they are good for you. It's 2 ways, and you have to explain, you have to sell yourself, and you also have to explain why they are a good fit for you as well. And that comes into, my father talked to an admissions officer, and he was talking about what are some of the most important things to talk about in your personal statement. And they say that one of the more important things are also your soft skills. How are you in terms of time management? In terms of self-motivated study, because Oxford is a lot of work where you have to work by yourself. So are you able to do that? What is your self-discipline like? These sorts of parts of your extended essay, it's not extended, sorry, your personal statement are very important, and they'll show to the university all those other parts. Obviously, within your personal statement, you should also include any sort of additional activities you've done. If you have taken up any sort of leadership positions in a club, in a sports team, these are all valuable parts of your candidacy to Oxford.
I see. Wow, a lot to prepare. Then, do you think in IB predicted score, PAT, and interview and personal statement, do they seem like equally important, or what's your opinion about it?
I think to get to the interview, the PAT and the predicted scores are the most important, and then comes the personal statement. To get from the interview to an offer, I think interview is the most important, then PAT, and then predicted scores. But if you don't have one, if one of them is very low, then you won't get to the next stage. All of them are quite important to do well in. But again, I want to say, I walked out of the PAT exam thinking I failed. I walked out of my first interview thinking I failed. I actually had a panic attack in the middle of my first interview. Yeah. For me, the whole table started turning like this, and I got really dizzy. And it was a very, very stressful experience. I did very well in my second interview because I walked into there very relaxed. I thought, you know what, in any case, I'm not going to get into Oxford. So this is just for fun. And because I was more relaxed, I was more comfortable saying, I don't know the answer to this, but I think that this is what it is. And so really being more intuitive and more open with the tutors that allowed me to do much better in my interview. So I just want to emphasize that they're all very important and they can all seem very stressful, but just because you don't think you've done very well doesn't mean you haven't done very well.
Mind control is important.
Yeah, it's really about being as relaxed as you can and having that confidence that you can do it, because in the end, if you've been invited to an interview, you have a 50% chance of getting in, so you have a high probability of getting in. And so it's important to remember that as well during your interviews.
Okay. And this is extra question for students. Is it possible to prepare Oxford and Cambridge at the same time?
It's possible, but you can only apply to one of the two.
Yeah.
You can only apply. Yeah.
Both.
You can't apply to both. You can apply either to Oxford or to Cambridge, but the exams are I'm not sure what the Cambridge version of the exams are, but they're very similar. I did a little bit of Cambridge preparation as well, and in the end I decided to go to Oxford. But yeah, you can only apply to one of the two.
Okay. Okay, I think we covered mostly for university application process. Then let's move on to university life.
Yes.